right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to MRC's regular quarterly board meeting. Nice to see some of these faces in person for the first time in a while. And welcome to everybody who's participating online. My name is Karen Casella. I'm the president of the board. And our first item on today's agenda is approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any changes that we need to make today? All right, seeing none, we'll consider it adopted and move on. Our next item is consideration of the minutes of January 26th, 2022 quarterly meeting and the February 14th, February 25th, and April 14th special board meetings. Do I have a motion? So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any comments or just corrections that need to be made? All right, seeing none, all in favor? Nice, like to be able to do that. It's gonna be a fast meeting. Next item is the presentation of the 2020 financial audit, which covers the period from July 1, 2019 to December 31st, 2020. And we have our auditor, Donald Higgins, CPA of Haverlock Estes and Curran, with us to give us a presentation on that. Good morning, Donald.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
No problem.
We're very happy to
busy,
see the audit results. So give us some highlights, please.
Okay. I would like to first start with these letters that are related to the audit. The first one is what we call the deficiencies letter. It starts with in planning and performing an audit of the financial statements, that one. Okay, when we plan for audits now, we're required to consider the internal control over financial reporting for the purpose of expressing opinions on the financial statements, but not for determining how effective those internal control procedures are. So we don't express an opinion on the internal control. But when we consider internal control, we're supposed to disclose to you if we find any issues with internal control that we consider to be deficiencies. In this case, we found what we consider some material weaknesses in your internal control system. And these just relate to controls over financial reporting. The material weakness is defined here. A material weakness is a deficiency in internal control such that there is a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement of the entity's financial statements will not be prevented or detected and corrected on a timely basis. So that's what we consider a material weakness. So in other words, when we perform our audit, the books and records should present a summary of the period's transactions in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Under GAAP, MRC and the joint venture are a single reporting entity. So there's one financial statement, but there are two distinct funds. We call it a general fund and a fiduciary fund. In these financial statements, the first finding is we noticed that there were certain transactions of the joint venture, which is a fiduciary fund, that have been combined with MRC's transactions in the books and records. This made it very difficult to audit. It made it very difficult to determine or get a good picture of what was going on within MRC and the fiduciary fund, the joint venture, because of the combined transactions in the accounting. So our recommendation is that these transactions not be combined. We don't want the general fund transactions, MRC transactions, to be combined with the fiduciary fund transactions. Because each fund should present its own summary of transactions so that we get a good picture of what is going on within MRC, the general fund, and the joint venture. That's the first finding. Any questions on that?
Bob?
Could you give us a sense for the nature of the types of transactions you're discussing in the remarks you just made?
A lot of them are in the next letter, the letter to governance. We can do that later when we get to that letter.
Fine.
Okay. Okay, the next three findings. These really could be combined into one because they all relate to understanding and implementing generally accepted accounting principles as it relates to governmental entities. That's an option. I split it into three because there are three different accounting principles that were kind of impacted, but they all have the same recommendation. The first one was in governmental entities, revenues should be only recorded when they are measurable and available to pay liabilities in the current period. So basically, in most governmental entities will choose 60 days as a threshold. If they're not expected to collect that receivable within 60 days of year end, then that income should not be reported as revenue. It's deferred. You might be familiar with that with deferred property taxes. If you don't expect to receive your property taxes within 60 days of year end, we have a deferred tax liability to offset that income that's not included in the current period. So that was one issue. And this was mostly with respect to the income from the loan, the interest on the loan to Coastal Resources, and the rental income that was being included in the in the accounts for, I think it was almost 9 months of rental income was included as income, but there was no expectation that any of that would be collected within 60 days, so it shouldn't have been included in revenue. Any questions on that? The next finding this is on the joint venture. We have a promissory note to Coastal Resources. Under general accepted accounting principles, receivables are supposed to be recorded at their impaired value. A potential impairment in value is such as when a debtor's creditworthiness significantly deteriorates. And this was the case. We had a creditor for the note. They probably would not be able to pay. So there should have been an impairment recorded, a decrease in the value of that receivable as of December 31st. The next one, we had a capital asset. In this case, it was the road that was built to the facility. That road and the utilities that went along with it were contributed to the town of Hamden. So in Maine, there's a law that requires whenever a municipality accepts a road or utilities that they receive a fee simple interest in that property. In other words, they own the surface of the road, they own below the road, underneath the road, under all the mineral rights to the road. You no longer have any right to do anything to the road unless you get permission from the town. So that's considered a capital contribution to the town of Hamden. Hamden will pick it up as income. They report as a capital contribution income on their financial statements, and you show it as a expense, a contribution to the town of Hamden. So that's just part of generally accepted accounting principles. Any questions on that? All right. That one was a little rough because I didn't like the accounting treatment. I thought there might be some alternative treatment for it. I researched it. I spoke to a couple other people in governmental accounting that have more experience than me, and they couldn't come up with any alternative treatment for it. And it's basically, that's what it is. You contribute it. It doesn't mean that the value of the property is decreased. And it probably has increased because you no longer have the cost of maintaining the road in perpetuity. But it's just, in accounting, that's kind of what we have to do. Okay, let's go on to the other letter. This one is directed primarily to the board.
Donald, can I interrupt just for a minute? I was hoping that we might be able to find out what MRC's response is to those findings. Either George or Sophie or Mike wanna. George, are you willing to take that? That would be great. Thank
Oh,
you.
absolutely. So first of all, I want to thank the auditor for the recommendations and the findings. I guess point one is that we've taken the recommendations and they're incorporated into the financials going forward. So we do appreciate 2020 was a time of tremendous change for the MRC in terms of new responsibilities, a lot of things going on. I think the deficiency letter didn't come till 2022. So there was a little bit of a gap between the time where we were doing our accounting and the time the audit came back. I think we've taken advantage of that time and of the auditor's recommendations to incorporate them. And in fact, some of them we anticipated at a prior board meeting and had direction to change the notation of or how the treatment of the interim loan and the value of the site on the books in first quarter 22 going forward. I think the clarifications we have now provide good guidance for going forward, and we can do that in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And similarly, on some of the questions of what is recorded with the joint venture with the MRC and what's within the general fund, we appreciate pointing out those areas of lack of clarity, and we've taken some steps to clarify going forward exactly how to do that and make sure that the next round of audits will be more transparent and more easily reviewed. So I think it's a good process that's helped us clarify what we need to do in response to all the changes we've seen in the last year or two.
Thank you, George.
Anything else? Sometimes you can add a response to this letter if you want. It's fairly common. You can say what you want to it. We would just have to add a note saying we express no opinion on the response. But you can add a response if you want to write something to add to this letter, you may.
I think we're probably fine. We just have it documented in our minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, the next letter is directed primarily to the board. It includes certain information that's required to be disclosed about our audit. On particular, no new accounting policies were adopted, and the application of existing policies was not changed during the year. And all significant transactions have been recognized in the financial statements in the proper period. One thing about financial statements, they require accounting estimates. Certain estimates are sensitive because future events affecting them may differ significantly from those expected. The most sensitive estimate that affected the general fund, or MRC, we thought was the value of the receivable from coastal resources. I know there was some hope that you could get some of that back. But when we look at the receivable itself, it was unsecured. The creditworthiness of the debtor was not in great shape. We look at, when in accounting, we look at the debtor, and at that time, we didn't feel that there was much value in that receivable. That receivable was on MRC was 116,000, by the way, which is basically interest on the $1.5 million loan and the rent from the site. For the joint venture, the fiduciary fund, the most sensitive estimate was the value of the promissory note from Coastal Resources. Same situation, but under GAAP, we're required to impair it if the value was declined. We felt that the value was not there. After discussions with George, we kind of had to reduce it down to zero based on the accounting principles. Certain financial statement disclosures are sensitive because of the significance to the users. We felt the most sensitive disclosures were Note 6 and Note 11. Note 6 on the allocation of the joint venture's assets, and Note 11, which describes the potential loss with respect to the facility. And that would happen in the future. Any questions so far on those issues? Okay, part of this letter requires that we disclose all material corrections made to your books and records. As far as MRC, this is in response to what we talked about earlier. We made a correction to the value recorded for that receivable from Coastal Resources of $116,571. So that basically, if you look at the balance sheet, which was on page, let me see, 15 of the financial statement, you'll see that I included the receivable from Coastal Resources of $116,571, but then it shows up as zero as the value. So the receivable is still there. We just reduced it. We have an impairment basically against it, a contra asset account, to reduce the value down to zero because we felt the value was closer to that. Tipping fees. This was done mainly to make it easier to bill the towns for all the tipping fees, but all these tipping fees were recorded as income on MRC's books, as well as on the joint ventures books. So there was $3 million, over $3 million of income reported on the MRC's books that just should not have been recorded as income. And it was recorded as an asset too. So this was a significant change that we had to correct on MRC's books. There were interim transportation costs that were recorded as expenses in both MRC, the general fund, and the fiduciary fund. There were some construction costs, and some of the cleanup costs were included on both sets of books. So George had included on his, and it was also included on MRC's books. So it was being doubly reported. Any questions on that?
George, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, first of all, that that I think going forward, we're taking steps to ensure that that the items that should be recorded on the joint venture books, the tip fees, disposal costs, and other things, are recorded only on the joint venture groups books and not also on the administrative side. And I think the other point, which was a bit of a source of confusion, is some will recall that as of December 30th, 2020, the MRC actually had a signed memorandum of understanding pursuant to which there would be recovery of some of those costs. Unfortunately, that did not come to be, but at the time, we did have a signed document that said it would happen. And I think so that the point being that this is probably something that some point during 2021, we needed to undo when it became clear that it would no longer happen. That was the situation with an ambiguous schedule, I'll put it that way. But I think that that you're absolutely right that we need to have a 60-day or something for some time frame scale for this. But at the time, given the fact that we had a written document confirming that would address recovery some of the costs, that was reflected in the books at the time. Some of this is the result of what we both know are subsequent events that show that even though there was a basis for incorporating recovery at the time, subsequent events showed that they needed to be treated differently. So we appreciate the review. We're now up to speed. And I think going forward, we'll accept your guidance as to how to do this more completely. So thank you.
Thanks, George. Mike, did you have something? you wanted to
Yeah, just a quick reminder, because we do have some new board members. This was an 18-month audit. So this was from 19 to 20. So things he's referring to is we had bridge waste, which we knew that was expected until commercial operations. And then we had the shutdown, which we didn't expect, where we had the cost to go in and clean up the facility for coastal. And then, of course, we have the transaction now of collecting the tipping fees and paying for the waste disposal. So all this kind of snowballed together. And I just want to, for the newer board members, remember this is over an 18-month period. So some of you weren't here for some of the things he's mentioned.
And now we're back on a 12-month audit schedule.
Now we're back on a 12-month
Calendar
audit.
years
We
from here on
will
out,
be.
baby.
So.
Bob,
Yeah, I don't think it's unnatural or unusual to see the kind of confusion we have in this stage of transition. But what I'm gathering from your comments is that every single expense was documented. Would you agree with that statement? That gives me a lot of reassurance.
That's correct. I mean, there were checks written, nothing was reported in cash. All the checks were reported somewhere. It's just a lot of times they're reported in two different places. And the issue mainly was the George's records were very accurate. I mean, there was a timing difference there that because MRC was collecting cash that was deposited according to their records on December 31st, and George didn't know that, and he hadn't reported as a deposit in transit. So there were some inter-fund issues related, that didn't get picked up, but other than that, it was fine. Okay, the next one we've already discussed is, concerning the fiduciary fund. It's just the note should be recorded at the estimated value, the carrying value, the access road, pump station, water main should have been removed from capital assets since they were contributed and accepted by the town of Hamden. All right. Let me see what else. Said management may decide to consult with other accountants about auditing and accounting matters, similar to obtaining a second opinion in certain circumstances. And to our knowledge, there were no such consultations with other accountants. A lot of this stuff is fairly complex governmental accounting rules. I mean, I think a lot of CPAs would not be able to even do this correctly, because you have to have experience in governmental accounting, which is a lot harder than it is like in a for-profit business. So it's a difficult area, and I'm not surprised there were issues in reporting this and recording the transactions. That's really all I have to say in these letters. Any questions on either of these?
George?
Yeah, just one quick question, which is that there's a Schedule 1 to the audit, which includes the schedule of joining member net positions as of December 31st, 2020. I mean, we've gone ahead and taken the recommendations and reproduced that schedule, but the allocations are slightly different than is represented in the schedule, though the totals are obviously the same. And I guess my question is, would it be appropriate to send you that allocation and have it appended to the final, or how do we treat that? And the main reason for asking is that becomes the basis for the 2021 accounting period, which after this audit is accepted, you're going to get that right away. So I just want to make sure that we are set up correctly for 2021 on the basis of some of the corrections that we've discussed in 2020. So is there an appropriate treatment for doing that in terms of sending in that schedule as an appendix to as part of this discussion?
Right, you've already sent me the allocation, and
Yep.
I just need to update it and send you a revised statement. But
Okay.
I agree with the allocation. I know how you do your allocation, and I think when I was doing this, I based it on, the prior quarter or something, and the way you do it, you do yours currently, and there's some little differences in how we do the allocation.
Okay, so I just want to make clear that 2020, that we have a clear basis for the end of 2020, so there's no delay in 2021. Great, thank you.
Thanks, George.
All set?
Yes.
Thank you, Donald.
All right, so does that wrap it up then? Anybody else have any other questions or comments for our auditor? No?
I move acceptance of the audit report. I move acceptance of the audit report.
Second.
Move and McCarty second. All in favor of approving the audit, accepting it? Fantastic. Ready to move on to 2021?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Donald. We really appreciate your service and appreciate all that feedback on our systems that we've got set up.
All right.
We look forward to seeing the next round.
Hmm.
Probably be seeing you sooner rather than later.
Hopefully, yes. Pandemic's mostly over, so we should be getting going.
Well, thank you and have a nice day.
All right, thanks.
Alrighty. With that out of the way, let's move on to some updates. We have our report from our executive director. Mike.
Thank you, Karen. This is the regularly scheduled quarterly board meeting, so my report is based on a review of the first quarter of 2022. With the recent town hall meetings the MRC has had, I've tried to keep my updates on the Hamden facility brief due to those recent meetings. So we'll begin with some MRC quarterly stats. The MSW tonnage for first quarter, members total MSW tons for first quarter of 2022 was 18,152 tons. Last year's members tons for first quarter of 2021 was 18,251 tons, an increase year over year of just about 100 tons. MRC continues to oversee the Hamden facility to ensure everything is preserved for the reopening and complies with permits. We are currently working on renewing the air permit, which is due on May 15th. I still meet with DEP's director and staff via Zoom regularly to provide updates and keep the facility's permits valid and in good standing. DEP visited the site and was very happy with how everything looked and was maintained. They were very pleased that MRC took their recommendations when mothballing the facility for a future reopening. MRC's president and I also had an opportunity to meet with Melanie Lozum, DEP's commissioner, and Susan Miller, DEP's director, in February of this year. Karen and I were able to update the DEP commissioner and director on the current status and negotiations for the Hamden facility and where things currently stood, including the possibility of MRC owning the facility. MRC also held its first special meeting and executive session for members in February. We feel this meeting was very successful with just over 60 attendees representing 75 MRC members. The board shared many of the ongoings with the current negotiations on the Hamden facility and provided more detail on the fundamental matter notice MRC was preparing to send. This also gave MRC members a chance to ask some hard questions outside of a public forum that they could bring back to their councils and boards. Bypass notices in Q1. MRC still sends bypass notices out monthly to all the members on behalf of Coastal, which directs the MRC's members on where they should be sending their waste until the reopening of the Hamden facility. I am happy to say that no secondary bypass notices have occurred since November 8 of 2021. This means PERC has been able to keep up with processing the MRC's waste and has not had to bypass it since then. Hamden facility updates for second quarter. In early February, after some tough conversations and negotiations between both parties, the bondholders and the MRC agreed on a final sale process to include a deadline date for the Hamden facility. Before bondholders let go of the Hamden facility, they want to make sure that they have done everything possible to recoup as much financially as they can. The only way for bondholders to feel that they have done that is to go through a sale process with professionals marketing the facility. This is something the bondholders initially skipped in the beginning. MRC agreed to move forward with a final sale process under the following conditions. Hire a receiver. The receiver acts as a liaison to the bondholders and a go-between / moderator for all other parties. Hire an investment banker. The investment banker will solicitate qualified buyers for the receiver. Buyers must qualify per MRC financially and technically before participating in the auction. MRC approved qualified buyers must close on the sale of the facility on or before June 30th. The facility will only be marketed to buyers who intend to restart the facility in the same or a similar manner as before and consistent with the existing MRC agreements and permits. A couple of essential things in the new asset purchase agreement, the APA, with the bondholders: bidders must qualify and the deadline to close is June 30th. If there is no qualified bidder and the closing does not happen by June 30th, MRC is a stalking horse bid on the Hamden facility for $1.5 million. In March, fundamental notices were sent out to 83 members via certified mail and posted on the MRC website on March 1st, detailing the stalking horse bid. No members requested a fundamental matters formal meeting by March 31st, which was the deadline to do so. The receiver was in place on March 12th, and the investment banker was hired shortly after. Both receiver and investment banker toured the facility on March 23rd. MRC has completed a draft performer and a business plan. We also have met with many lenders in operation in preparation of possibly owning the Hammond facility. MRC attorneys have connected with the attorneys of the mechanic lien holders on the Hammond facility. All have expressed the support for MRC's efforts to get a sale accomplished. We have completed and signed the APA and Exhibit 3.3. Exhibit 3.3 is the questionnaire requiring the bidders to check each qualification question, yes or no. It also includes a box for the bidder to list what they are attaching to verify their qualifications. April's also been very busy. MRC has spent much time with the investment banker over the last several weeks, getting them up to speed on the history and the operations of the Hammond facility. The investment banker has the data room all up and going, and once potential bidders sign an NDA, they are granted access. The data room is full of documents for bidders to review on the technical and financial aspects of the facility operations. Most of the MRC communication goes through the investment banker at this point. Many tours of the Hammond facility have taken place, in some cases, multiple tours to the same potential buyers. I actually have a tour tomorrow scheduled for a new potential buyer. Moving forward from now until closing this is what it will look like. By May 16th, preliminary bidder qualifications are due with agreement markups if applicable. This is more or less an application that determines if the bidder is qualified to bid. May 17th through May 27th, MRC will still receive and screen bidder qualification documents, review any requests, go back and forth with bidders, asking questions, and perform due diligence. June 3rd, now that due diligence and qualifications have been reviewed, the receiver will announce which buyers are qualified to bid. June 7th, the selected buyers bids are due, and these are their actual cash offers. June 14th, investment bankers will hold an auction with selected buyers for the highest price. In other words, lower bidders at this point can bid in specific increments to outbid the highest bid until no one bids any longer. June 30th or prior, a closing will take place to complete the sale of the Hammond facility. I asked the investment banker, Dan Zellingwell from River Mill Advisors, if he could provide MRC and its members with an update on marketing and the sale process for today's meeting. And this is what Dan said. Mike, the sale process remains very active. 103 parties have been contacted in all. 18 have signed NDA/confidentiality agreements and have access to the data room. 5 are considering signing NDAs and whether they'll proceed as a potential bidder. 59 have not responded. 21 declined any interest. 5 parties have been highly active and appear to have medium to high level interest in the opportunity based on their on-site visits and ongoing interaction. In my report today, I have spoken quite a bit about qualified bidder, so I want to take a few minutes to go over what that means. Qualified bidder will be broken down into 2 buckets: financial capability and technical capability. Screening bidders on financial capability. Some of these things that we will be looking at, but not limited to, is bidders must have proofs of cash on hand, ready to close on or before June 30th. Proof of finances or means to finances available to them for facility upgrades and startup. No changes to the MRC current tip fee structure or pledge of the MRC selling their land. Present MRC with a high-level pro forma. Screening bidders for technical capabilities. Bidders will need to show MRC their experience level with operating a material recovery facility known as a MRC, experience with pulp production and marketing of commodities. If they don't have the background or lack experience in some areas, then what does their plan look like? Such as, will they be bringing an operator in? We will also have the new owner or operators submit a startup and operation plan as part of the qualifications, which will include but not be limited to company org chart, staff and plan and timeline, diversion plan. MRC will review all the information in the bidder qualification forms. We will conduct due diligence and have back and forth with the potential buyers. Once a full review has been completed and all questions answered satisfactory, it will then be decided if the buyer is deemed qualified to move forward to submit a bid for the auction. With that said, the bidder qualifications forms will start rolling in on May 16th. I think the board should consider scheduling some time for tentative special board meetings for 2-hour blocks. We should consider meeting on May 18th, May 20th, May 24th, May 26th, and May 31st, June 1st and June 2nd. For example, something like 3 to 5. That's the schedule I passed out to you. And what I think we should do, because we have to advertise our meetings, is we should get those dates up and we can go back and forth on what times work best. We may not need all these meetings. We may need to add more meetings, but during the vetting process and going through the due diligence and for the board to be able to ask questions, go back and forth. You know, this is going to be a fast process, so we probably should get those meetings on the books. Karen, I don't know how you want to handle that, if you want to
So-
commit to it now or.
Well, so one of my comments or thoughts is that if we think we might need to add meetings, I'm thinking we should just block that time out now. I mean, if you're thinking on these days where we don't have meetings scheduled, we may need to meet. I think we should just set a 3 to 5 standing meeting every day during that block period. And then people know, they can just put it on the calendar. And we may not have to meet those days. These are more likely to meeting days, but just so, especially the board members have the opportunity to just try to schedule around that to the extent that they can. You know, and then we can just have a blanket notice out to members that that's the plan, and we can within 24 hours, you know, say yay or nay, whether we're a meeting or something like that. I don't know how people feel about that, but I'd rather have it blocked out now rather than in a couple weeks from now thinking, well, or you know, a few days before, well, we're really gonna need to meet on Friday, when we didn't think we were gonna need to meet on Friday, the 27th.
So what
Yeah.
the 17th through the 3rd?
Probably not the 17th, just because the things are.
Yeah, they're
really
just gonna
have
start
firm
coming in
So I think we're pretty safe on the 18th through the June 2nd.
I would start with the 18th. Yeah, with the second. I mean, in June
So-
3rd, that Friday.
So, let me back up. You're suggesting every business day between the 18th and June 2nd, we're carving out from 3 to 5?
Just to have it on our calendars as a potential, and with some of the. So the idea being that we are gonna likely need to meet multiple times over that period, and I just assume get it set up at a time that seems to work most conveniently for people now. And then we can pre-notice the meetings, people will have tried to block out and schedule around it. But
So we have 2 meetings each week, plus 3 meetings on the last week. Blocking those out makes sense to me. But 5 days from 3 to 5, just because, I mean, go for it. I don't know if I can do that. I'll block these ones out, but.
right, well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if these things seem like they'd be the most likely, then these would be the most priority. But if Mike is thinking we might need to meet other times, you know,
Yeah, so if we my only fear is if we end up with 7 or 8 qualified bidders, that's a lot of presentations and due diligence and a lot of maybe coming back to the board. They need this change, they'd like this, this is where we're at. If we end up with 2 or 3, I think these dates will work. You know, it's just the unknown is I
So there's
think.
not gonna be any screening by staff before we get to the
Absolutely.
presentation for the board?
Absolutely. I just don't know how technical they're gonna want to get into agreements, Sophie, and
So I give lots of time to the MRC, so it's not about time. You're also right in the middle of my budget season. So the likelihood, I mean, to work around and still have a couple of afternoons in a week, I think I could probably do that. Every single afternoon gone, but I also just wonder about the board's responsibility moving forward. This feels kind of weedy to me, and maybe I'm not getting it, but I mean, to get to a point where the board's gonna take 7 presentations or 6 presentations, that seems like very weedy as opposed to, yeah, here are the finalists, folks. Here's who we think can do it. The top 2 or 3, bring them in and meet with the board.
So as a suggestion, I think practically it makes sense to at least have set aside, if you will, meetings. I think it's what the calendar reflects. I think what Mike is saying, which I think is absolutely true, is we don't know exactly what we're going to get on the May 16th, but we'll know on the morning of the May 17th, which I think will allow us to adapt to that schedule. But I think what Karen was mentioning is because there's a very limited time window with the unknown of how much information that, and absolutely staff will be doing the due diligence, getting it ready, but recall there may be with these submissions, proposed changes to key contracts that I think if that occurs, there certainly will need to be discussion with the board at that level. It's just uncertain how much volume of that discussion we will necessarily have. And I'm very appreciative. It's a busy season for municipalities, right, smack in budget. So I think to the extent folks can have a flexible schedule or at least have set dates. And I think on May 17th, we'll have a much clearer picture of here's precisely, the dates we'll use, or maybe we need to move some or add some. So I think it's kind of, let's set some specific ones to the extent you can, keep that time period open if possible. And May 17th, be ready for a very concrete schedule in that time frame, because there's just a limited time window. And we want to make sure we allocate sufficient time, both from the staff level to the extent the board level, to make sure we do a comprehensive review of the technical, the financial capabilities, as well as any proposed changes to agreements. So I think that's the best we can do under the situation. And doing our best, of course, is anticipating whatever it's going to be. So we're just trying to look ahead to make sure 2-week window. It's going to be busy, for lack of better phrase.
I like Karen's idea. And we need to do it. We're winnowing down to the end of the funnel here. And we need to make every effort, bend over backwards, whatever the word is, to accommodate review of these things. And also what this does, as I understand, expedites the advertising, shortens up the advertising period for public meetings.
Well, it would just take care of it.
It would take care of it.
We're just going to put it all on one go.
Yep.
But we're putting these dates,
Yeah.
not every business day between the 18th and the 2nd.
That's what we're discussing right now.
We are, that's Karen's suggestion, is from the 18th to the 2nd.
Well, certainly.
But we'll know the 17th a little better when we can fine tune those.
Yeah. So how about, I have a suggested compromise. Like, what is the likelihood that we're really that you all are gonna have reviewed enough to have us meet on the 18th and have anything worth discussing? Maybe can we put off the first meeting until maybe the 20th? And then then you've got your first level review of whatever the proposals are. So at least we're saving, a day or two of potential meeting times. But
I guess. So I'm the one that's making the stink about this, and I didn't want it to be this kind of stink. So let me try to reframe what my stink really is.
I think I understand what you're saying, but
Well, I think the more time we devote, the more the board is likely to get into the weeds, and I don't want to do that. Not because I don't want to give time, but because we hire people to get into the weeds. And what I find is when we end up there, we end up in very circular thinking, which quite honestly costs us a great deal of money, because we have amazing consultants that run that circular thinking with us, and we pay for them. But the other question, you know, if we need it, we need it. I don't like the idea of kind of just blanket saying MRC might have meetings between 3 and 5 PM, Monday through Friday of these 3 weeks. And then members trying to chase meetings. I think that seems very counterintuitive to the public meeting. That's just me. Now, I'm not gonna jump out of this and suddenly not come to meetings or not participate. But I just want to make sure we're making effective use of our time and that we are truly advertising what's going to happen. That's all.
Strange circumstances require strange measures. And I think that what Karen has proposed works. We need to be to react at a moment's notice.
I agree with Tony. I blocked the time out already on my calendar. I'll probably be traveling and have to do some of these meetings via Zoom. which
Oh,
is
I'm
fine.
expecting all of them to be by Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That makes it even easier.
Yeah, thank you.
So that even builds in more flexibility. I'm assuming this is worst case,
Yes.
and it probably is. So you've allowed for that,
I'm trying to be respectful. This is the first time we've had a deadline.
right?
And I will say during this whole process, MRC is not, we're always waiting on everybody else through this whole process since we've been doing this. We get all our stuff in a timely manner and we've turned everything around. And so I'm trying to be mindful of the deadline because I don't want anybody coming back saying, you're holding the process up. We're not closing on June 3rd.
The other thing I'd add is I want to know what people think of these guys. I mean, I think it's important to have all of us looking at this at some point to weigh in.
Like Sophie mentioned, we will definitely, no different than before, that's the whole purpose, and we work so hard on this qualification exhibit. I mean, it's pretty detailed. So I don't think anybody's gonna get through the gate that can't answer this to, really good potential and really fill this thing out. So like I said, I just want to be mindful of the deadline, and in case we have to jump in there and meet and make a decision because a change needs to be made or they're looking for something, I want to be able to do that and get everything back.
Aaron, does this include meeting with them if we think it's advisable to sit down and get a feel for who they are?
I definitely think that
Good.
they would come in and do a presentation.
Think of the time period between May 16th and May 27th. It's 2 weeks. So May 16th is their preliminary submissions, if you will. And the 2-week period is a time period for discussion back and forth, due diligence. May 27th is their final submission. So it's certainly very possible over the course of that due diligence, whatever their preliminary submission may differ from the final submission based on discussions. I do think a lot of those will be driven by staff review, staff discussions, but I also believe there certainly will be board level discussions as well. I'm very mindful of trying to take all the information, summarize and distill it so it's in as a digestible form as possible for the board, so you don't have to do the laboring or. But I do think certainly as possible could be valuable. There's nothing like seeing someone at least at the other end of the screen to get a sense and feel for what they have for capabilities. I would keep the 18th. It's going to be, I know that's very soon, but 2 weeks is not a very long time. I would keep that start date. Maybe later in the afternoon would be good. The bottom line is staff is going to have to work very diligently, efficiently, leading up to that, to provide that distillation of initial information so we can get going. I don't think we'll need to meet every day on the 18th and afterwards, but I guess my perspective would be expect to meet more than once after the 18th for sure. I think these are good days. There may be the need to meet more, maybe less, depends on how many folks there are on the schedule. So I'm plead for flexibility to the extent that we can and plan for it during a 2-week time period.
So Kevin,
I just want to clarify, Sophie had said something about letting staff whittle it down to the last two or three finals or whatever, but in this case, we're not ranking them, right? They
it's a thumbs
qualify or
up,
they don't.
thumbs up or thumbs down.
So there could be
That's
12 or there could be
Yeah.
15. It's not our
Yeah.
ranking thing. We're not,
Right.
oh, we like this one better now. We can have our own thoughts, but we don't have any
Well-
input towards that.
So we do, to the extent that they're all gonna need to have some changes to fundamental contracts, master lease supply or site lease or something like that presumably. And, you know, some of them we can live with and other ones perhaps we cannot. So it's still a thumbs up or thumbs down. It's not a ranking, but there's gonna be work that we need to do to think about whether or not it's something that we're willing to make an adjustment on.
Yep.
And some may have different proposals or better quality proposals than others.
That's good. Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe it, so.
And I should mention, and Mike did a great job describing this, is even though the final submissions are due on Friday, May 27th, there's a week to essentially do that final review. And that's really a collaborative or joint effort between MRC as well as the receiver and others. Because June 3rd is when whoever qualifies, that will occur on that date. So it's not like we're done on May 27th. There's still more to do, but my expectation is we'll have a very good sense because of that 2-week period, you know, who will have a final submission, we'll know on 27th. We'll already frankly know primarily the content of that, minus any changes they may make. So there will be things to do that first week of June as well.
These meetings are 100% executive session. That we would notice something else individually if votes were going to be taken to do it.
Yeah, I think
Correct.
so. I mean,
Okay.
we don't need to vote on qualification, right? Is that?
No, I mean, by the nature, just how many people are bidding, who they are, and all the information, that is all confidential as part of the sale process. So Sophie's absolutely correct. All of the substantive discussion will need to occur in executive session. And, you know, how we communicate with the receiver on, okay, when we're doing the final review of the final submissions, you know, we can do that post May 27th before June 3rd. It'll all come through Mike or collection of Mike, perhaps yourself, Karen, or whoever may be designated to do so. But we can do that.
So this is what I'd like to do. I think we should plan on the 18th and the 20th meetings. And we'll notice those, but we can hold off on doing any kind of broadcast notice of subsequent dates until we meet and we know what has been submitted for qualifications, how many people are in play, how complicated we think it might be based on the nature of who's proposing and what you all looked at that first week. But for board members, I would like you to block out the 3 to 5 p.m. for the 23rd and the 25th, as well as the dates that Mike has set. So just to have it on your calendar as a potential date that we might need to meet, especially given what John was just saying, when people are going to have to put their final submissions in on the 27th, they may have a lot of requests and questions to the board with regard to what kind of changes we may or may not be willing to accept. So that could be a busy week. Hard to say.
It's hard to say.
Does that make sense for folks?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for that, Mike.
So that wraps up my executive director's report. In other committee news, legislative bills 911 passed that bans the spreading of raw sludge and biosolids compost on land. Bill 1639 passed. This only allows main waste processors to dispose of their residuals in the amounts equal to or less in the state-owned landfills of what was processed in Maine, generated in Maine waste. On the communications, MRC sent out 22 constant contacts in first quarter, hosted 2 town hall meetings, and hosted a special executive session meeting for members. The MMA Maine Town and City Magazine for April's cover story
was Maine's waste management hierarchy. Karen was interviewed as part of the article and did a really nice job. So if you have a chance, take a look at that article. And finally, Bob and I worked on the earmark for congressional direct spending, CDS, request for fiscal year of 2023. This was due on April 8th. Bob was a tremendous help in this, and I could never have gotten it done without him. Bob, would you like to tell us a little bit about that earmark?
Sure. There's some things the Camden plant was never designed to do. And among them, taking care of discarded tires, asphalt shingles, wood and forestry materials, embedded metals, mattresses, upholstery, and universal waste. Plant can't handle any of that stuff, and yet every single member of our organization has it and has to get rid of it in some way. So Mike has come up with a great plan, and that's what the earmark is about. We've applied for a $6 million grant to address these issues. And one of the things that came up during that conversation was the idea of branding the MRC. And my thinking on this is we do need to rebrand, and we ought to focus on a new logo, a catchy name that integrates the purpose of the enterprise, the design of the logo, and the principle that underlines the products it produces. So I want to turn that idea over to Karen.
Well, I just want to thank both you and Mike for submitting that application. That was to Senator Collins' office. And I think it was really important. Senator Collins has been a big supporter of the facility. She's very much behind it. Was very happy to have received a proposal from MRC. And I love the fact that it looks to the future. I mean, it looks to what MRC is going to be able to do once this plan is reopened and operating, and all the other things and services that we'd like to provide to our members that we know the MRC is capable of doing, the needs that our members have. And I just think it's great. So it's like this whole new, MRC 2.0. And I do think that it would be a perfect time for MRC to think about what it'd like to be in the future and to, sort of recreate itself. And, we've got a new facility. MRC is going to have a new relationship to the facility, whatever that ends up being. We'll find out in the next couple months. And I think it's a great time to do that, and especially something that would encompass and encapsulate the idea that MRC has lots more it can offer its members and would like to offer its members and people who are not members, the region as a whole and even the state. So I think it's great. And I mean, along those lines, the whole idea of, the way MRC is structured now with its, whatever we have, waste flow control committee and the communications committee. I mean, we just, just put it all into a bucket and shake it up and figure out what the best setup and structure is for MRC going forward, given what our new role is going to be and what the future we think looks like, once we know what that is in July. So, Tony?
Have we let local communities know, considering this,
You mean the earmark or like the rebranding?
the facility, the earmark?
Well, I think not really. I don't think we.
Well, no, we had done so we have a survey already all prepared to go to communities to find out all what their different needs are for the materials and these different types of waste. Jesse and I worked on that survey. But then the coastal closed. And of course, we've sent out many surveys and our focus is now on getting coastal reopened. So the opportunity came to do the earmark and we wanted to get that done because there was a deadline. But what we will do is that survey will go out, we'll find out what the needs are from our members. Because it's all done and ready to go, but we don't want to lose focus on reopening.
No, I understand. I'll winnow it down, that we discussed this with the town handler.
Yes, Bob.
I was just wondering in terms of, and it has nothing to do with the timing. Obviously, this is going to take place a while down the road. We have a lot on our plate right now, but would it be helpful to have a working group session? Either with the board or certain people who are interested, and just call an informal meeting for a couple of hours toss ideas around, see what comes out. Or is
Well,
that too
yeah,
much?
I do,
So
I do think it would be a good idea to have maybe a subgroup of folks or people who are interested from the board to get together to talk about how MRC might approach this idea of sort of thinking about the future and restructuring and maybe rebranding, just to try to come up with a concept to bring back to the board to consider. And I mean, yes, Sophie?
But before we spend a lot of time with concept, the town of Hamden adopted several ordinances after our facility was permitted.
I think I should say, I probably misanswered that properly, is we did have CES look into a site plan.
But Hamden's aware of the concept.
Prior to doing the airline. Whether they physically sat down with Hamden on that.
So I understand, Tony, I understand. We will reach out to the town of Hampton. The idea was not to tread on anything lightly. We wanted to get an application in, so the senator's
Well, I
a big
worked on,
supporter of the facility. We could not conceivably come up with a way to submit an earmark request that had anything to do with reopening the facility, especially since we didn't own it. We had no idea what the situation was going to be. The timeframes are just, the lead times are very long on earmarks. So, this was the next best thing because Mike had already worked on the concept. He had a great plan. We're not going to do anything if it's not in keeping with what Hampton wants to happen on that site. But, I think they will be supportive of it. And
you
so-
understand my concern.
I do understand your concern, and it's totally valid, but so we will make sure we close that gap. And, this idea of this rebranding and revisioning of for MRC is completely separate from this idea of the earmark and what MRC might do in the future for its services. I think MRC needs to go through this process regardless of whether or not it ends up owning the plant or somebody else is running the plant. I think it's time to do it, whether MRC just keeps doing what it's doing right now, which is MSW for its 115 member communities, or whether it decides it wants a bigger role and wants to expand out and provide more services. I mean, I think we need to go through the process regardless. But I'm also sensitive to this idea that if we end up owning the plan, we're gonna own that plan on July 1st, and things are gonna start happening very fast. And that's the time to sort of capture our abilities for this change. And so waiting until July 1st to figure out and start a process of rebranding. I mean, maybe we can wait until July to find out, but I don't necessarily see any harm in people getting together before then, although we do actually have a lot on our plate. So maybe we do need to wait until June to start that off. But I like that idea, Bob, of getting together to sort of just like formulate some thoughts to bring back in a more coherent manner to the board for something more formal. Because I think we will probably need some professional assistance in sort of corralling or, with the logo and whatever else that we think.
I understand the work that goes in it. I have submitted an earmark on a much smaller scale, but it is a lot of work just for that one. But I appreciate the optimism that we're showing that the plant's going to sell and maybe us.
Yeah.
I do appreciate you doing, because Mike, that's been one of your favorite topics for quite a while. And I think it makes sense.
So I think maybe we can slate that pre-meeting for June. How do you feel about that? Since that would be after my budget's done, hopefully. And we've gotten through the submissions from the bidders, and we have maybe a little bit of breathing room before the next thing happens. But I guess if you feel like you're interested in participating in that pre-meeting, maybe you can let Mike know, and we'll obviously be talking more about it at subsequent meetings that we have. But great. One other thing I would like to mention too is that Bob has agreed to assist MRC in applying for a grant through the Prime Fund, which is being run, administered by the Maine Technology Institute. This is part of the ARPA funds being rolled out through the state's Maine Job and Recovery Plan. And while the potential for this first round of funding is relatively limited, the maximum amount we can apply for would be $400,000. I spoke with the guy who's administering it, and he was not discouraging, and said that they could award something on a contingent basis so that we only get it if we ended up owning the plant. And I'd say $400,000 is not a small amount of money. So Bob has looked at the application. It feels like we'll be able to do it, but would love some assistance if anybody wants to help make it a good application.
I'm wondering if we could go ahead and do it, even if we don't end up doing it, because we still have a lot of other costs that could be covered. And might please help.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's a possibility. I didn't really read it with that in mind. So if you feel
They
like you
talk
could-
about a startup, they talk about continuing operating.
Yeah.
I think we can fit in some of those niches.
even better. So that's really great.
Okay.
So Bob's been working hard. He's our financial guy. He's really doing a great job with Mike there as well. So
I'm gonna give Glenn the hand next Tuesday, might tell the tailors and have my time. Good for me.
Absolutely.
thank you.
And that's all I had on my reports and community and committee updates, Karen.
Mike, I just want to say thank you again. I mean, really, I'm not sure people really have a sense, but he works all the time on this. I mean, any time of day that you call, say, you taking a break? Or he's calling from the plant, checking on the plant. Really, it's just incredible the amount of effort that you put into it. It's very noticeable and so.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, we have our asset management report, which will be presented by George Prepared and will be presented by George Aronson from Commonwealth Resource Management Corporation. George.
Thank you, Karen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good, okay. So again, this is the quarterly asset management report. It includes updated financials for the MRC joint venture, not the administrative part, that's the joint venture of the joining members through March 31st, 2022. Because we did have the advantage of receiving the draft audit report which actually went through the end of 2020, but it had recommendations. All of those recommendations are implemented in the financials that are attached to the asset management report. So I just wanted to make sure that people were clear that the discussion that we had with the auditor does bear on the numbers you're seeing. We've incorporated the recommendations going forward, and that included some retroactive changes to 2021, because again, when we present financials, we just don't present the current quarter, but we go back to the last audit just to make sure on a quarterly basis, just to make sure that people have the benefit of the history and context of past quarters when looking at balance sheets, et cetera. So again, just to go through the numbers very quickly, and you'll see that this balance sheet is a little simpler than prior balance sheets because some of the items have been consolidated in accordance with the auditor's recommendations. But the balance sheet shows assets as of the end of March, the end of the quarter, of about $6.238 million. Much of that is in the TIFI stabilization fund, but also in the cash collateral account. Those are the two large investment accounts in which significant funds are held. The value of the Hampton site is shown at about $1.14 million. Our sense is right now that's a book value. If we did an appraisal, the number might be higher, but we haven't done that appraisal. So in accordance with the auditor recommendation, we're sticking with the cost of the facilities that were not transferred to the town of Hampton. And overall, 6.2 million. And likewise, the payables are shown, the payables for the distribution and the payables to disposal facilities as of March 31st using the new method for doing that. And table 2 shows the changes in position, and as always, we match the change in net position to the adjusted differences between the additions and deductions, and that way we know when we line up that everything is accounted for. To keep it brief, the letter has 5 recommendations. The first, to distribute 125,603.45 to the joining members, to reduce the effective net disposal cost by $5 per ton for those that were equity charter municipalities and $3 per ton for those were new charters going back to 2018, and to reimburse the fees. And the specific numbers are shown in table 3 of the attachment. Second, to transfer $125,000 to fund the distribution from the TIFI stabilization fund, which is the investment account, to the D&D account, which is used to handle distribution. Third, to transfer additional $200,000 from the TIFI stabilization fund to the contingency account. And again, this is for cash flow needs, which include mainly coverage of bypass disposal costs and other working capital. 4, to transfer $50,000 to the operating account, which was anticipated in the 2022 operating budget. So this is actually to fund administrative expenses in the next quarter as anticipated. And 5th, and at the time this was written, we don't have the exact timing of the need to do this, and there's some details we need to work out. But because the MRC is serving as a stalking horse, it's going to need to make a deposit, or it's been asked to make a deposit of $150,000 with the receiver, and to place an additional $850,000 in an escrow account pending the result of the auction process and the qualification process. Both amounts would come from the cash collateral account and apply to the sale price if the MRC is ultimately the purchaser. There are a couple of details here. It might make sense to leave the $850,000 in the cash collateral account if the receiver would agree to do that, since that's an account that's not in the MRC's direct control. There are a few other points to be worked out. The point is to have the board on record as authorizing these particular deposits into escrow accounts should they be needed as the receivership process continues. So those are the 5 recommendations. I think the rest of the report goes through the assets and the liabilities, some of the cash flows that we've seen, and provides the financials, what the distributions would be to each of the joining members. So with that, I'll look for questions.
Thanks, George. Does anybody have any questions? No questions, George. Did a great job.
Oh, thank you. Well, we did cover most of the issues with the audit report earlier, so
That's true.
I think I'll take that.
Entertain a motion.
I move approval of the recommendation.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the recommendations in George's report. All in favor? Oh, sorry, any discussion? All in favor? All right, we got it. Thank you, George. Appreciate it. As always, your thoroughness. All right, Sophie, you're up with the treasurer's report.
I am. So we had a finance committee meeting earlier today. We reviewed our invested funds. We reviewed the asset management letter that the board just accepted. We reviewed the budget to actual and the bookkeeper's financial statements. There were a couple of minor questions that George, Mike, and I are going to follow up with various people about. We'll get answers back to you. And we proposed accounts payable totaling $60,624.02. Just the normal operating payables, and recommend approval of the payables.
And make that motion. Second.
All right, we have a motion and second to approve payables. Any questions or comments? All in favor? And do we usually vote to approve the treasurer's report or the, no?
It is mine now.
All right. Very good. Okay. So we really just have one more item we're going to consider. Before that, I just wanted to let folks know our next regularly scheduled quarterly board meeting is July 27th. And that will be again in person. Perhaps here we'll notice the location, but quarterly board meetings we're doing in person. Special board meetings we're doing by Zoom. So. But the next item we have is our little perennial gem here is the review of extension letter regarding integral capabilities for performance test protocols. Love that title. John, would you do us the honor of giving us the little overview of what we're doing?
Sure, happy to. So as Karen mentioned, this is been a periodic item on the quarterly board meeting. This harkens back to the performance test protocol that occurred back in November of 2019, which was passed, but there were certain conditions in order to meet what were termed these integral capabilities. So what the MRC has been doing is there's a time frame to that. So what we've been doing throughout is extending that time period, and essentially we've been doing that every quarter to be a few days after the meeting. So the recommendation is still to extend that once again. So my recommended form of the motion would simply be to authorize the executive director to execute an extension regarding the integral capabilities performance test protocol. Similar terms and conditions as the prior one, to it including July 29th, 2022. So that's a recommended form of the motion. Again, it may be moot by that point, but it still is recommended to nonetheless do it, since it does tie to several of the key agreements, and maintaining the integrity of those agreements is very key as we look to get a transaction done, on or before June 30th.
I'd make that motion. And I don't want to put it in words because John just said.
I would second that motion.
All right, we have a motion in a second. Any questions? So, John, are these related to like specific improvements that need to be done? Or, I mean, are we expecting the next owner of the plant to be required to, I mean, you said it might be moot. I'm just wondering how it would become moot.
It depends, I would say, on a number of factors. It may depend on, what a new owner may or may not want to do with, for example, the pulper component. If MRC is the owner, or a related affiliate of MRC, that may change circumstances. So it's really hard to say necessarily, and there may be other changes, if you will, as part of a new relationship under the key agreement. So it's something there that I would say is more recommended from a preventative standpoint, just so we can continue to represent, we have these key agreements and contracts in place. Those are the primary driver that make this facility go from a revenue production standpoint on the front end. What will happen as to those integral capabilities very much will depend on the new owner and owners and how that unfolds, post June 30th. So we'll just have to wait to see is what I would say.
So this is maybe more of kind of preserving our rights and sort of holding our position in terms of a potential new owner, which we're in, as opposed to specific sorts of improvements that we're expecting to be made to the plant.
In essence.
Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. All in favor? All right. Great. Extended to July 29th. Thank you. Next, we have public comment. I'm assuming we've got some folks participating remotely. We don't have anybody from the public here in person, but if anybody who is participating remotely has any comments or questions, we'll be happy to entertain them at this moment. We do have an executive session listed on the agenda, but we have no need for an executive session today. So after public comment, we'll be moving to adjourn.
We had just two people thank us for reaching out to the town of Hampton related to the earmark process. So Paula Scott and Eric Darby both said that. I've seen so far.
All right. Sophie, do you have something?
So I received an email from somebody after our last town hall meeting. If they're not going to comment about it, I'll comment about it. The gist of the email is that they wanted to just remind us that time and space has happened since the plant closure. And when they listen to the commentary at the town hall meeting, they feel like some people are losing the fact that the plant was operating and operating well before it closed down, that what closed the plant down was mismanagement and not enough capitalization when they started based on their management. And the suggestion came whether or not as we do another town hall or if we could put something on the website that just clearly reminds people of the fact that the thresholds were met and the plant was operating. And so it's not like we are thinking about buying 4 walls and a roof of something that doesn't work and having to sink a ton of money into creating technology that works, that the technology works.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I've had some similar intimations that I've gotten from folks that are like, feeling like if MRC were to own this, that we're buying a dying asset that nobody else wants, which is really not the case at all. There's been significant interest in the plant because of its, unique ability to address waste needs and the fact that it operated successfully for 7 months. So I think that there's a lot of potential for this plant in the future. So that's great. We can work on reinforcing that message. Anything else that came in there, Jesse? No? All right. Well, thank you all very much for your time. I appreciate seeing everybody's faces, and we will be announcing those special meetings that we had talked about in May by constant contact at some point. And of course, our next regularly quarterly board meeting is on July 27th. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Can we also just make sure that when we fill those constant like, if somebody wanted to know that there was a board meeting happening or a special board meeting, I wish that there was a thing that they could just see on our front page that would,
There is like right on the front page.
why are they missing it?
Well, it's called upcoming meetings.
It's not even, no, it's listed right under. It's updated there and on the homepage too. But we actually.
It's a wrap.
Like, I see at the bottom of the list. I just didn't scroll down enough.
Do we vote? We are assuming everybody approves the majority.
Yeah, you can just
The vote left
declare it.
out.
right?
Declare.